Hello, welcome everyone. My name is Chang Dang, and on behalf of the Asian Development Bank, ADB, this afternoon, I would like to thank everyone for joining. I can see 66 participants, so hopefully more people will be joining us in a little bit. And we have a great discussion waiting for us on how digital solutions are being used to mitigate flood impacts and create flood resilience in vulnerable communities in cities. That's what we will be talking about this afternoon, and we have a great speaker lineup, so we do want to get started. Next, please. You may know that this webinar is the second of our ongoing ASEAN Australia Smart Cities webinar series, with each session focusing on a specific topic on digital solution that aims to help cities to tackle specific issues related to the improvement of city planning systems, service delivery, as well as financial management. So you do wish to receive invitations and updates about our upcoming sessions, please do sign up to our mailing list using the QR code, which you will see on the top right of your screen right there. Before we proceed with today's discussion, may I just have some quick housekeeping announcements that we want to share with you. So first of all, the slide presentations from this session will be shared with everyone a day after the webinar. And in which we also include the link to the webinar recording, so you can watch it again if you like, and we'll be uploading it to our YouTube channel as well. And secondly, we'll also be sending a link to our post-event survey, so we hope you'll be able to spend some time to fill it out, and your feedback is greatly appreciated for us to understand our audience as well as to improve our upcoming webinars. Next, please. So after our panel discussion, we'll be opening the floor for questions. And in the interest of time, may I suggest that we'll not use the raise hand function of the Zoom platform, but instead, please submit your questions through the Q&A box, which you will find at the bottom of your screen right there as we go along the webinar. And when submitting your questions, please make sure that you direct or indicate which speaker you are directing your questions to before your actual questions, and we'll try to accommodate as many questions as time will allow during the Q&A session. So to kick off today's webinar, I'm very excited to introduce the Australian Ambassador to the Philippines, His Excellency Stephen J. Robinson, AO, to give a short introductory remark. Over to you, please, Ambassador Robinson.
Thank you very much, and a very warm welcome to those joining the ASEAN Australia Smart Cities webinar on mitigating flooding impact with IoT early warning technologies. I'd like to acknowledge the speakers for today, Mahesh Prakash, Alison Snedden, Daniel Twigg, and also recognise the Mayor of the City Government of Baguio, Mr. Benjamin Magalong, who is going to join us a little bit later. I'm delighted to be involved in part 2 of the ASEAN Smart Cities Digital Solutions webinar series. I'm especially pleased to participate in this session on how digitalization and new technologies are being used to mitigate flood impacts and create flood resilience in vulnerable communities within cities. This series comes at a really interesting time when we've experienced firsthand the extraordinary disruption of the COVID-19 pandemic and witnessed how digital technologies can allow us to adapt and find new ways of doing things. The world's climate is changing rapidly. The impacts from climate change are magnifying a whole range of challenges around the globe. Disasters and extreme weather events like flooding and cyclones are already impacting on the livelihoods, critical infrastructure, and productive industries that we have. At the same time, the good news is that the world is rapidly expanding its technological capabilities to be able to mitigate risks and respond to these challenges. Australia has long supported climate action through its Development Assistance Program and investment in disaster resilience. In the Philippines, since 2006, Australia has provided over 1.34 billion pesos, that's around 38 million Australian dollars, to support policies and activities on disaster and climate risk management. Through our scholarships program, the Australia Awards, we have built capacity both through short and long courses in climate change, science and technology. Australia will continue to support the Philippines government's efforts to enhance climate and disaster resilience and foster collaboration between Philippine and Australian science-based agencies. There are also great opportunities to engage the private sector in finding solutions too. I'm really pleased to note that Australian businesses have helped the Philippine public and private sectors to find ways to protect water supplies from floods and typhoons and raise awareness of the impacts of typhoons through virtual reality experiences. Solutions will really require creative thinking at all levels, from communities to national policy makers. On this note, I'd also like to take time just to acknowledge the ADB partnership under the ASEAN Australia Smart Cities Trust Fund, which aims to improve core functional areas, planning systems, service delivery and financial management of participating ASEAN cities through adaptation of appropriate digital solutions. I really look forward to hearing the innovations and solutions the speakers will highlight this afternoon. Mabuhay, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for such a great introductory remark, Ambassador Robinson. Thank you for sharing your insights, and we can't thank you enough also for the support coming from Australia, the Australian government. And both Australian government and ADB have been contributing to addressing disasters, including flooding in the Philippines, and we'll be hearing a case later on in the Baguio City. So thank you again. Now, before I introduce our first speaker, we just wanted to do a quick audience poll to get an understanding of the extent that flooding affects you. So we have two questions in this first set. The first question will be popping up on your screen right now. Thank you, Christine. I'll be reading it out loud with you. How frequently does your city experience major flooding? That's the question. Always, often, sometimes, rarely, or never. And please select your answer now, as we'll be closing the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. The poll is now closed. Let's see what results we get. Often is the most selected answer, and if we combine the often and the always answer, we're going to have 39% of the participants in this afternoon's webinar that have been experiencing flooding. There's a 5% of never, so lucky those. But other than that, obviously that is an issue that we should address. Now we have an idea of how many people are affected by flooding. Our second poll question, we want to get your thoughts on how well your local government is using digital technology to deliver early flood warning to their constituents. So this is the question. How well do you think your local city government is using digital technology in delivering early flood warnings to their constituents? Extremely well, very well, fairly well, not well at all, or not applicable because my city does not have a flood early warning system. Please select your answer now, as we'll be closing the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Okay, let's see what we get. Fairly well, excellent. Fairly well is the most selected answer, 33%. And there's a 5% of extremely well and 9% of very well. So that is very positive. We have almost half of the respondents saying that their city is responding well using digital technologies. And there's a 29%, unfortunately, of not well at all and not applicable because there's no flood early warning system. So obviously there's work for us to do there. Okay, so we have a good idea of your experience in responding to flood. Now, to start up today's webinar, it is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Mahesh Prakash from the Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organization, or CICERO Data 61. Dr. Prakash's expertise is on urban flood modeling, geospatial big data analytics, and the confluence between environmental research and technology, including how an integrated approach could be applied in resolving some of the intractable challenges associated with deploying these tools for real-world applications. And this afternoon, he'll be discussing how to adapt to flood using technology. Without further ado, over to you, please, Mahesh. Thank you.
Thanks, Trang. Thanks for the introduction. So my talk today is going to be about using flood modeling capabilities to improve adaptation against flooding in cities, both for current day as well as for future, including climate risk considerations. Moving on to the next slide. So we focus primarily and significantly on coastal flooding and also its interaction with catchment flooding. Where I live in Melbourne, which is a coastal city, one could call it a coastal city. There are several low-lying areas where there are flood adaptation challenges, and this gets exasperated because of the fact that we're also facing climate change related sea level rise. So we've been developing a range of novel modeling and adaptation approaches to evaluate what sort of adaptation might work now as well as into the future. The capability also gets used for carrying out cost-benefit analysis. So whenever you put in these adaptation measures, you also have to look at the cost associated with it and the benefit it is actually providing. So moving on to the next slide, I'll show you some examples. So there is a region in Melbourne, a suburb called Elwood, which is a coastal suburb, and this is where we have been doing this work quite a bit. So we work with the engineers within the council, within the local government, and look at a range of adaptation options. So as you can see there, we have been evaluating 4 different types. So including back valves along the canal, adding street level detention systems, household level detention systems, and also digging out large parks to a depth of about 1.5 to 2 meters, so that these becomes retention basins as well. The question is, these measures are not cheap, they are expensive. The question is how long will they last in terms of either avoiding flooding altogether or reducing the flood levels. So moving on to the next slide. Here's what the overall flooding looks like for this particular region. The modeling shows us that the water is colored by retention time. So there's different ways of coloring the water or looking at the flood impact using modeling. Either you can look at it from a depth perspective or a speed or a retention time perspective. Here it shows that there is reasonable flooding in this particular region, and the water lasts for about 3 or 4 hours without adaptation. If you include adaptation, can you just, you can find that the flooding is not present, which is not surprising because we have actually over-adapted this region for current day flooding. Moving on to the next slide. What we have there is quite significant amounts of flooding where you've got water lasting in certain locations for more than 15 or 20 hours, which is a serious problem. This is with a sea level rise of 0.4 meters. So based on climate science, we're expecting this sort of scenario to occur around the 2040 to 2050 level. Now with adaptation, if we can see that those sorts of flood levels have been reduced quite significantly, and you're going away from unmanageable flooding to flooding that is kind of closer to what we have now, which is manageable. So that's a good outcome. But let's see what happens at a 0.8 meter sea level rise. Moving on to the next slide. So without adaptation, that a significant part of that suburbs actually impacted by flooding. With adaptation, if you look at the image there, you are finding that even with quite significant adaptation measures introduced, those flood levels haven't changed by much. So what this is actually saying is that above a sea level rise of about 0.6 meters, there is a bit of a tipping point here in that your standard engineering approaches are not going to work. So what this sort of modeling allows us to do is to start looking at using these digital sorts of technologies to figure out what the effectiveness of these adaptation measures might be for now as well as into the future. And moving on to the last slide, what we are doing now is taking this initial use case as a sample and extending this work to the whole of the Port Phillip Bay region. So Port Phillip Bay is a large embayment, one of the largest in the world, where there is a significant population of Melbourne centered around that region. Approximately 1.5 million people live and use those facilities in that area. We are extending this work to that whole region in order that that particular area can be well adapted from a climate change flooding perspective. So this approach can obviously be extended to other parts of the world, including in Philippines. Yeah, look, it's just a way of actually demonstrating what modeling and analytics techniques can do to help with flood-related planning. So I'll stop there, and I'm interested in understanding people's points of view. And if you've got any questions, let me know. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mahesh, for such an excellent presentation. And thank you for letting us see a little bit about your modeling work and to what extent we can adapt to flooding and at what point we have to consider other measures. So that was really great to hear. Thank you very much. So before we move on to the second speaker, let's take the third audience poll. Can you please pull up the poll, Christine? Thank you. This is the question. In your opinion, what is the most effective method of delivering timely early flood warnings to citizens? National Emergency Broadcast System or SMS-based alerts from telecom providers or mobile app-based alerts, either free or paid, or traditional media such as TV, radio, or newspaper, or the last one is localized door-to-door announcements. You please select your question, your answer, as we have 5 seconds before the poll is closed. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. The poll is closed now. Let's see what the result tells us. SMS based is still the most selected response for 61%, and mobile app-based alerts would be 21%, while the traditional media has very, very little selection or choice of only 2%. In some situations, obviously, we would still need the localized door-to-door announcements. So I'm very happy to see the different approaches being considered here. Thank you very much. Let's look at the next question before we move on. Christine, please, let's have the next question. How confident are you that flood early warning systems currently in place consider the needs of women and marginalized gender groups? Please tell us if you are extremely confident, very confident, fairly confident, or not confident at all. Please select your answer now as the poll will be closing in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. It's closed. Let's see what the answers are. Not confident at all. This is interesting. This is going to be a topic for discussion. And there's a 4% of extremely confident, 42% are fairly confident, but the most selected answer is still not confident at all. Later on in our afternoon webinar, we will be hearing more about how to make early flood warning system more inclusive to women and vulnerable groups. So I'm very happy to hear this from you. Now, please let me introduce our next speaker. Mr. Daniel Twig from Deltares, the Netherlands. Daniel is an expert in the field of flood early warning with over 10 years of experience in developing flood early warning systems around the world, including the National Flood Early Warning Systems of the Netherlands and urban flood forecasting and early warning in Singapore. He will be discussing new solutions in flood early warning systems in Asia. Without further ado, over to you, please, Daniel. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Trang, for your introduction. As said, my name is Daniel Twig from the Netherlands, and I'm here today to share some recent work by Deltares in the field of flood early warning with you. Next slide, please. So as Deltares, we have extensive experience in, say, developing flood early warning systems around the world, largely based on our Delft Fuse technology. Which is used in Asia and Southeast Asia a lot as well, with implementations in Indonesia, Singapore, and Vietnam, among others. Next slide, please. And if we look at the way in which these systems are commonly set up, they connect to monitoring networks which measure rainfall, discharge, water levels, which is subsequently provided as input into forecasting models. But if we look at these measurements, often these networks have limited coverage. They are expensive to maintain, and also they don't measure, for example, the flood extent. So there's limitations to consider. But we feed them into our models to create a forecast. Next slide, please. Subsequently, we issue this forecast, or we issue our alert. And for those of you involved in operations, maybe you recognize a situation where then you are sitting behind your computer screen in the control room, and you wait, and you wonder what is actually happening on the ground. You might wonder, how good was my forecast? What is the impact of the flood event taking place? And often we only have limited information about this. And maybe we are in contact with people on the field by telephone, or we are browsing Twitter. But our situational awareness often is lacking, at least in our experience. Next slide, please. So with this in mind, institutions like Deltares, but also others, are exploring lots of different ideas to get additional information, which could be relevant to flood early warning. For example, linking to IoT devices, so cars, ships, telecommunication networks, to see whether there is meaningful information in there, which we can also use in this context. Well, many of these techniques, however, are still very much in R&D, and hence I want to focus on one other technique, which is much closer and actually already used in operations, namely flood mapping and monitoring using online media. Which at Deltares is a topic we explore extensively in collaboration with Floodtex, another Dutch company which is specialized in this field. Next slide, please. So how does this work? You can imagine that during flood events, people start tweeting, start posting on Facebook. They might share photographs of an area which is flooded. And maybe they are texting with friends on Telegram and WhatsApp and the like. And actually, we can tap in on this information through the APIs offered by these platforms. And subsequently, using techniques like natural language processing, we can interpret, say, the content of these messages, and we can find those messages which are about flooding. We can geo-reference them. And subsequently, how we can provide them to interested parties in much more convenient ways. So, for example, the left-hand panel shows an overview of where in Indonesia, among others, people are texting about flood events, and it's becomes very easy as an operator or a crisis manager just to drill down in your area of interest and see what is actually happening. The right-hand figure shows that subsequently you can also easily connect this information to your flood early warning systems, where in this case for the city of Jakarta, you see the rainfall and the number of online messages linked to a recent flood event earlier this year. And there you could, for example, compare this with the flood maps coming out of your forecasting models. But it also helps you to spot false negatives in areas where maybe you need to zoom in on and give increasing attention. Next slide, please. So there's other ways we are using this information as well. For example, we are exploring different ways to do impact-based forecasting based on content we've mined from these online media, based on historical records of flood events we've obtained this way. We are busy validating our flood models and further improving those. And also we are using these platforms increasingly for active user engagement, two-way flow of information with people on the ground. And this information we can also subsequently process and mine and take into account in our systems. So a lot of, in our impression, promising techniques to further improve the flood early warning process. Next slide, please. So that's where I want to leave it with regard to that example in view of time. But I want to close off with some by highlighting some challenges moving forward, using techniques such as this, but also say with regard to the further usage of IoT in the field of flood early warning. The first one being access to data. There's a lot of potentially interesting data out there, which is proprietary to commercial companies. If we want to mine car measurements for rainfall, for example, this data belongs to the car companies. If we want to tap into telecommunication networks, we need to get in touch with the telecoms. So access to data is one. Subsequently, this data by nature is not intended to be used in the flood forecasting process. So there's a lot of processing involved to get meaningful signals from all the noise, so to say. And also to quantify these data or these measurements into hard numbers, which we can subsequently combine with our forecasting models, for example. Interpreting a picture qualitatively is much different from getting quantitative numbers from such a picture. And lastly, in our experience, often the road from R&D to operations can still be long. And many of these techniques at this stage are still in their infancy. So there is still quite some way to go before we can use all these wonderful ideas in actual operations to have meaningful impact in the flood early warning process. That's where I want to leave it for now. Of course, very curious to hear your thoughts and ideas on this. And I'd like to thank you for your attention, and by all means reach out if you want to further discuss these topics. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daniel. That was an excellent presentation. I was very happy to see that, the research now looking at connecting, what is there in a model to what's happening on the ground. And I think this is something that we as development workers, in ADB, but other organizations are faced with, how to operationalize all of these wonderful research that has been going on. So we're very happy to hear that. And I'm sure that audience will have questions for you. Thank you very much. Now, may I introduce our next speaker for today, Ms. Alison Snedden from Practical Action. Alison is a disaster risk reduction advisor at Practical Action, where she works on early warning systems and climate information services, with recent and current studies investigating the roles of gender, probabilistic forecasting, and digital mapping in early flood warning system. Unfortunately, Alison is unable to join us live today due to an earlier scheduled event, but she'll be giving her recorded presentation where she'll discuss the work on gender transformative early warning systems. Without further ado, here is Alison with her presentation.
Hello everyone, my name is Alison Snedden. I'm a Disaster Risk Reduction Advisor at Practical Action, and it's great to be able to talk to you about some of our work. A key focus of our disaster risk reduction work is on flood early warning systems, which we focus on because they provide the communities that we work with the vital time that they need to prepare for and respond to floods safely. But we realised that although there is a lot that's known about the way that gender influences vulnerability to disasters and the impacts of disasters, there was very little known about the connection between gender and early warning systems specifically. So we conducted a study in Nepal and Peru so that we could learn about the perspectives and experiences of different gender groups in relation to flooding and to flood early warning systems. So I'll share here today some examples of our key findings from Nepal, looking at gender in relation to vulnerability, participation, dissemination, response, and power and decision making. And I should highlight as well that a lot of the discussion is in quite binary terms, and this isn't intended to exclude other gender identities, but it's a reflection of the discussions that we had with study participants. So when talking about vulnerability, there was a strong consensus across our study participants that women are more impacted by the negative effects of flooding than men. Men attributed women's vulnerability to a lack of knowledge about the early warning system and about how to respond to a warning. They talked about physical vulnerability and a comparative lack of physical strength, and vulnerabilities related to pregnancy and to menstruation. But women didn't attribute their vulnerability to these same factors. Women tended to mention two main reasons for their greater vulnerability that weren't considered by the men that we spoke to. So firstly, the restrictions of their traditional clothing, which becomes very heavy when wet and very difficult to move in, and gender norms that prioritise male decision-making in the event of a flood. We then went on to look at participation in the community structures and platforms where things like community early warning systems and disaster risk reduction initiatives are rolled out. And we found that marginalised gender groups participate much less in early warning system initiatives due to things like the domestic roles, which affect how much time they have available to participate, as well as a lack of autonomy, mobility challenges, and social isolation and persecution in some cases as well. There were also perceptions that the engagement and participation of these women was not relevant or welcome in these spaces. Then we looked at the dissemination of warning information itself, and we found that the gender inequality in education and literacy, and then related to that in economic capital available and access to technology, resulted in gender differences in access to information and the capacity to receive and act on early warnings. The next area we looked at was response, as in response to early warnings that were received rather than a humanitarian response. We found that groups that had a higher vulnerability, such as women and other marginalised gender groups, tended to have different preferences when it came to preparedness and response, which included very notably a preference for earlier evacuation. So women tended to prefer to evacuate promptly after receiving an early warning. And were often unable to do so. Finally, we looked at gender when it comes to power and decision making in an early warning system. Stakeholders shared a perception that women participate well at the community level, however that the representation tends to drop off significantly when it comes to district, regional or national level disaster risk reduction structures and departments. This obviously creates a gap in the representation and the consideration of women and of gendered needs at these levels. So I just want to conclude with a couple of key points. So first of all, the reason that we focused on this study was that an early warning system which doesn't consider gender runs the risk of further reinforcing the marginalisation and the vulnerability of the people who have less power and influence. And it runs that risk because it overlooks the specific gendered needs and constraints and priorities that people have. But equally, we risk weakening these systems that are so vital because we're excluding the capacities of these groups and the knowledge, the skills and the resources that they bring. But also it's important for us to remember that women and gender minorities are not all equally and uniformly vulnerable. We need to understand how vulnerability can be increased because of different and intersecting factors and identities, and that we can't treat women as a homogeneous group that all has the same needs. So these findings all lead us to an understanding of why a gender transformative approach, which aims to address the roots of gender inequality rather than just working around the effects of gender inequality, is vital when it comes to the effectiveness of early warning systems. One of the most important ways that we can be transformative in our work is by putting the voices of marginalised people at the centre of our design and development and delivery of early warning systems. So as part of this study, we also produced a report called Missing Voices, which is a compilation of first-person accounts of flooding from marginalised women. So I'll finish there, but if anyone would be interested in finding out more about this study, it would be great to connect with you. So thank you all very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Alison, for that presentation. It was such a powerful message about how we really have to make flood early warning system inclusive. It has to work for everyone. And obviously, based on your research, as well as the results of the poll that we were pulling earlier, there's a lot of work to be done in order to make this happen, to make it transformative and inclusive for everyone. In order to move forward, I would like to now invite another colleague, Katherine Grant, who is the Senior Gender Specialist from the ASEAN Australia Smart Cities Trust Fund, who will be answering questions on Alison's behalf. And Katherine, would you like to say a few words?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. I have a few comments I'd like to make to reflect on from Alison's presentation. First, I'd like to note that it's often the case that gender is considered separately to discussions on technology and engineering, and having experts from all disciplines in a forum like this and placing gender and inclusion at the center of the discussion is the key way that we facilitate inclusive innovation in this space. I'd like to reflect further on the importance of context and how early warning systems are only as effective as they are context specific. Differences between towns, between and within towns, cities, and regions can be vast, with women and marginalized groups experiencing unique challenges, strengths, and preferences. So we need to ensure that we have a really nuanced understanding of the gender and vulnerability context and involve women and marginalized groups in the design and implementation of these systems. This is particularly important when we incorporate emerging technologies. As our speakers have described today, we have enormous opportunities with existing and emerging technologies for early warning systems, and tailoring these solutions in an inclusive and participatory manner is the challenge, as is recognizing that innovative technologies exist alongside very many other tools. How we integrate women and other vulnerable groups' needs into early warning system frameworks, as well as ensure that they have access to the digital tools that can play such an important role in their safety and security and that of their families and communities, is the question that I'd like you to ponder after this webinar. While I can't talk on Alison's behalf, I'm certainly happy to answer any questions that the audience might have in relation to gender and social inclusion. It's certainly been a pleasure to listen to Alison, and yeah, look forward to hearing the audience feedback on how we move this discussion forward. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Katherine. Thank you for that. And what better way to conclude our webinar rather than looking at an example in Baguio City. So I would like to, with pleasure, I would like to introduce Mayor Benjamin Mangalong from the city government of Baguio in the Philippines. Mayor Benji served a long and distinguished career with the Philippine Constabulary and the Philippine National Police for 38 years. Before he was elected as the mayor of Baguio City in 2019. Before Mayor Benji and a colleague from the Baguio will make a presentation, let us have the last poll for today to see how we as citizens would be willing to participate to early warning system. The poll, please. The question is, subject to the availability of proper reporting platforms, how willing are you to help provide flood updates in your immediate vicinity. Extremely willing, very willing, or not willing at all. Please select your answer now as the poll will be closing in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. The poll is now closed. Let's see what the results tell us. Extremely willing. I did not expect any otherwise. And there's nobody who is not willing at all. So we could say that 100% of our participants are willing to participate. And let's consider this active users participation in flood early warning system. So I'm very happy to hear this. And without further ado, can I introduce Ms. Tolanet Anaban, the Deputy Head of the City Planning Office, to please present on Mayor Benji's behalf. Thank you.
Okay, so warm greetings from the city of Baguio. Thank you, Trang, Christine, and the ADB team for inviting us here in this webinar. We want to take this opportunity to also express our gratitude for choosing the city of Baguio as a recipient of support from Asian Development Bank through the Asian Australia Smart Cities Trust Fund to develop a smart flood early warning information and mitigation system. This project is indeed very timely as we are also about to update the city's comprehensive land use plan so we can mainstream the disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation and eventually improve the resiliency of our local communities from any disaster, including this pandemic that we are currently facing for almost 5 months. Next, please. As an overview of the city of Baguio, the Baguio is popularly known as the summer capital of the Philippines due to its cool climate. Compared to the lowlands, our temperature is colder by 9 degrees Celsius. So Baguio was designed for 25,000 to 30,000 people, but with rapid urbanization, it has already reached a population of 345,000 in 2015, with an annual population growth rate of 1.54%. Estimated population for this year is around 371,000. Considering the unique topography of the city, as you can see on the slide, most residential and some commercial buildings are built on hilly to mountain areas. Next, please. So Baguio City also plays significant roles, such as the prime education center of North Luzon, the Center for Health and Wellness, catering to the local community and neighboring provinces, the top 14 preferred tourist destinations in the country with tourist arrivals in 2019 of around 1.5 million. It is also the center for trade and industry and the seat of national government offices in the region. Next, please. The few slides that I will be showing you are snapshots of 3 major flooding events that happened in the past. The first one was in October 2009 with the onslaught of Tropical Depression Parma. Next, please. In 2012, dozens of houses were submerged in floodwaters after Tropical Storm Helen, killing at least 2 people. Next, please. The last major flooding event occurred in September 2018 with the onslaught of Typhoon Mangkhut. The Burnham Lake, which serves at the right picture, serves as a rainfall basin, also overflowed, reaching the height of the park benches. Next, please. Another one is that the back of the house is actually a waterway, and the house is built within the waterway easement, blocking the water from coming from the road leading to the waterway. So flooding in the city occurs actually in just specific areas and mainly in the low-lying areas. And we discovered the main causes, which are: first is the blockage of drainage due to accumulation of garbage. Second is the limited capacity of the drainage system, which cannot contain excessive or increasing rainfall. Another one is siltation. And the last one is the narrowing of waterways with the encroachment of settlements along the easement areas. Next, please. Hence, upon the assumption of our City Mayor Benjamin Magalong last year, we formulated the strategic goals, which include, among others, the speeding up of government actions through digitalization, revitalizing the environment, and efficient disaster management. These strategic goals are meant to attain the vision of a resilient and smart city. Next, please. Recognizing the relevance of innovation and technology in efficiently carrying out our government functions, we have these current smart city system initiatives. The first one is the Smart City Command Center, the Baguio in my pocket, the digitalization of the LGU processes, and including the cashless, the transformation to cashless transactions. Aligned to the development direction of the city, the ASEAN Flood Early Warning System project aims to improve flood early warning system, responses, and mitigation measures. It will establish flood early warning information system using satellite data, hydrological and hydraulic modeling, as well as real-time data captured in strategic locations in all 4 rivers in Baguio City. Further, the project will also prepare a flood mitigation action plan, including nature-based solutions. Baguio City will also be at the center of a city twinning program for smart flood warning and mitigation, and will work with other cities to improve the resilience to disasters, including floods using smart technology. The project will soon be connected to our smart city system for early disaster warning and monitoring purposes. So again, thank you for the support of the ADB that the ADB is providing to this city. So have a great day. Mayor Benji is online, so he can answer questions.
Thank you so much, Tanette, for such a great presentation. And I'm very happy to see that flood early warning system is now fitted into the bigger picture, the bigger plan of the city for resilient and smart Baguio. It's not a standalone project, and we can't be prouder to be contributing to it. Before we proceed to our Q&A question, may I just have 1 minute to hear from Mayor Benji, please, since we have the honor of having you here, Mayor Benji. Over to you, please. Thank you.
Okay, first of all, thank you very much, Chang. I would like to thank ADB and our partners from Australia for this flood water or early warning information and mitigation system. Some people are asking, how come there's flood in the city of Baguio when it is about 1,500 miles elevation, or 1.5 miles of elevation? And that's precisely because we have depressions in the city of Baguio, and these are actually subjected to a lot of incidents of flood for the past several years. And you should also understand that Baguio is one of the cities or localities in the entire Philippines with the highest amount of rainfall. So we're really experiencing a lot of flooding here every time we have strong typhoons and storms. And in fact, one of the mitigating actions that we have done is we ordered about 300, almost 250 demolition orders for structures that were built along our canals, and we need to recover all this easement. One of the challenging issues is that it's becoming an unpopular decision, but we just simply have to do it because it's the right thing to do. So, as I said, we're very much committed. I would like to thank the Australian government for giving us this opportunity to, showcase their flood warning and mitigation system. And it will be a really welcome development for the city, especially now that we're going to build our smart city system. I just would like to inform everyone that this month we're going to start the construction of our system, and it will be undertaken by Cisco. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mayor Benji, and we're very happy to hear all the actions going on the ground there. This is exactly what we would like to hear. So without further ado, let's now open the floor to questions. I can already see 2 questions here on the screen. And for those of you who would like to submit a question, please click the Q&A button, which is at the bottom of your screen. And please indicate which speaker you are directing your questions to before your questions, and we'll try to accommodate as many as possible. Now let's start with the first question from Alvaro Fonseca to Daniel Twig, please. So Daniel, could you share with us your experience in the process from the warning to the actions on the ground by the potentially affected communities, what has worked best, and which communication channel or technology has worked for you? Thanks, Daniel.
Yep. Okay, thanks for the question. Good, good question. So you ask what worked best and which communication channel or technology worked best. And I think in our experience, there is not one best solution which will work across the board and everywhere. But looking at some best practices, maybe it usually helps to tap into and use platforms or tools which people are already accustomed of using, and using systems already in place. Because if you introduce something completely new, this can often be a barrier in, say, the further uptake of these systems. It could be as simple as, for example, for many people, maybe going to a website is already more cumbersome than looking at a message on WhatsApp, which they are accustomed to using. So tap into what they are already using and use systems already in place insofar as possible. And if there's nothing, then yeah. Okay, let me end my answer there. I hope that answers your question, say, sufficiently. If not, please let me know.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you. So obviously, different measures will work for different people, so we'll need to consider different groups. Excellent. Thank you. Let's go on to the next question for Mayor Benji, please. I'm sure there will be more for you if we would have more time, but this question is great. Are there any of the smart cities initiatives described in the last slide, for example, the smart city command center that you are building now, that connects or will connect to any local network for local warnings? Over to you, please, Mayor Benji. Thank you.
Okay. Right now, we have not considered that. First of all, we are getting warnings from the OST, from Pag-asa, and probably our system would have a platform that would immediately, would make it open to all types of system that will be plugged in to the platform that we're building for our smart city system. We made sure that the flood control will be can immediately be plugged in, and that's something that we demanded from Cisco, and that also includes systems like soil erosion, as well as air quality monitoring. So our system is open to this kind of systems, and we're making sure that it's only the first phase. It's only the first phase. We still have to undertake 2 phases for that to be able to completely cover all the functionalities that are embedded in one really good smart city system. I just would like to emphasize one thing. Most of our projects that we have undertaken, and at the same time we will be undertaking, I've never considered gender as something of significance. And I'm really, it's an eye opener for me, especially listening to one of the presentations that gender should be something that we should always consider across all the other projects, and it's an eye-opener. Thank you very much for opening our eyes. Thank you very much for highlighting it. So rest assured that in all our future projects, strategic projects for that matter, we will be gender sensitive. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mayor Benji. So I really appreciate your answer to the question, about being holistic, but maybe even more so, I appreciate your humbleness. If I may say, your willingness to learn. And I'm so glad that you were learning something just like myself. I've been learning a lot from today's webinar. Thank you. So in the interest of time, we only have 2 minutes left, and thank you for staying on until now. We still have 2 questions. So may I just take the one of them very quickly about the criteria for a city to participate into the ASEAN Australia Smart Cities Trust Fund. So usually that works when a city is considered a part of the priority for the government, but also for ADB support to the government. So I would advise that you get in touch with us as ADB after the webinar if you're interested, and we can discuss. Let's just take really one last question, please, because we need to close the webinar. So I will give it, what is the panelist experience in convincing cities to invest in these solutions? What is the most important element? Cost, ease of deployment, inclusivity, or something else? Okay, let's direct the question perhaps to Mahesh. Would you like to take this one?
Yeah, look, I can give you my understanding of what happens in the Australian context. So I guess one of the key challenges from a adaptation effectiveness perspective is the people who've got the purse strings have to understand and be convinced that the measures that you're taking is actually going to be effective, either from an early warning perspective or from the perspective of mitigating or adapting to the flooding. So the more you're able to provide evidence to convince the people who've got the purse strings, the better it is. I mean, in my view, that is probably the most challenging part. So, there's this concept in Australia which we are driving called resilient investment vehicles. And it's got everything to do with building back better. So, when you have a particular disaster event, and if you're building back after that event, you don't want to be building the same structures, which is what tends to happen. But if you can develop methodologies to prove that with the same amount of money or similar amount of money, you can build back better, and you can provide an evidence-based way of demonstrating that, you're in a much better situation than otherwise.
Thank you so much, Mahesh. So cost effectiveness, but also evidence that it will work. How do we show that it's going to be effective? It's going to be key. Thank you so much. We still have another question, but I'm afraid we'll have to close the webinar now, and we may have to follow up with you after this webinar. But I'm very thankful for the interest and the questions that have been posed. So this is all that we'll have for this afternoon. I would like to thank Mayor Benji. Thank you very much again. Ambassador Robinson, Mahesh, Daniel, Alison, Catherine, and Tonette for sharing your ideas and experience today. I hope you found them valuable. And all participants will receive an email with the link to the post-webinar evaluation form, a copy of the presentations as well, and the webinar recording, and a link to a short video on your YouTube page on how digital solutions are helping countries like the Philippines to restart and enhance its tourism sector in the new normal. You can see a picture of Mayor Benji again here. You see him again in the video, which will be posting soon. Next, please. So again, today's webinar is the second of a series of 6 webinars that we have planned, and our next webinar will be on the 6th of October. We'll be discussing digitalized urban planning for improved efficiency and compliance. If you would like to get invitations and updates about upcoming sessions, please do sign up to our mailing list using the QR code, which you'll find on the top of the screen here. Next, please. And please also follow us on our social media platforms where we'll be posting content about our trust fund activities, updates, and upcoming events. On behalf of the speakers and our organizing team, thank you so much for joining us today. We hope to see you in our next webinar on the 6th of October, please. Thank you and have a good day. Goodbye.
you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.